Welcome to a new video. Today we'll be checking out r/Ask Reddit. This post is by Bureau 18. Kidnapping victims of Reddit. What's your story? Gooseling answers, my brother-in-law was kidnapped for a day once when we were in high school. He was on a school trip to Chicago for a couple of days. He and a friend wanted to go and find some weed, and they asked some random guys on the street. Guys were like, yeah, come with us. So they ended up going into the projects in a really bad neighborhood, and they realized that something was not right. They tried to leave, but the guys separate them. My brother-in-law gets taken to an ATM, where they try to make him empty his account. Instead, my brother-in-law runs, losing his shoe in the process. The kidnapper pulls a gun, but decides not to shoot my brother-in-law, and he gets away. His friend is still back in the projects. He decides his best option is to befriend these guys. They eventually let him leave, and they even exchange phone numbers. This only lasted a few hours, but still not a fun experience for anyone. J-Rock says, standard, not me, but my little sister, and an attempted kidnapping. This was back when I was probably 8 or 10 years old. So my sister was about 4 or 6 years old. My memory isn't great from back then, but this is etched into my brain. My family lives in the San Francisco Bay Area, and my slightly older cousins and their family were visiting from Puerto Rico for a few weeks, so naturally they wanted to go see the city. This was a weekday, so my dad was working, and my aunt and uncle decided to go up to wine country for the day, or something. That left my mother to drive and take care of 4 kids under 14 years old in the city. The beginning of the day went well, and we all walked around doing the touristy stuff like eating taffy, going to the fisherman's, looking for sea lions. We decided to stop for lunch at a small place near where the ferry launches to Alcatraz, and proceeded to sit and eat on some long cement bench things. One of my cousins and I ate our food, and then started goofing off, chasing each other around. You know, being stupid kids that everyone around probably hated. My mother, being the saint she probably was trying to let us burn off some steam and let us play, but kept an eye out. Now there's 4 of us, mind you, and 2 of us being brats. So keeping an eye out on everything was probably not the easiest task, especially when we're all in different directions. I started running back towards my mother, who was smiling in my direction. This is where the day turns. I'm watching all of this happen from 20-25 yards away. My sister, while my mum was looking at me, stood up and started walking along the cement bench, and was maybe 5 feet from my mother, who had no idea she had gotten up. This part is etched into my brain. A middle-aged, maybe 35, woman in a pink top walks right past my mum and to my sister, picks her up from behind, and just starts walking off. My sister didn't make a sound, and I don't even think she knew what was going on. When you're that age, you're always being picked up, and just assumed it was mum. I watched a strange woman walk away with my baby sister. That's when my mum turned around and didn't see my sister behind her, and instead in the arms of some lady walking away. Now they say to never get in the way of a mama bear and her cubs, and this was no different. My mother dove on them, grabbing my sister and pushing the lady away. My mother began yelling and screaming at this lady who pretended she could only speak Chinese. The lady ended up running off before anyone even thought about calling the cops. My mother was just crying and holding my sister and my cousins, and I was just standing there in disbelief. Since then, my mother has been even more of a hawk on us in public, until we were old enough to go out alone. But the whole thing could have ended up terrible. I can only imagine what someone would want with a young girl. This world is a fucked up place, and people like this lady deserve to be in hell. I became more vigilant and vowed to protect my sister no matter what. Whenever I'm with her now, which isn't that often as I live on my own, I still don't let her out of my sight. There's creeps everywhere, and she's still just a kid at 18. Thank you for coming to my story time. This one's from Tenyu. I was a kid. Parents had a typical split custody thing. Weekdays with my mother, weekends with my father. Well, our father didn't like this agreement and took us, one sibling and I, one weekend and moved halfway across the state. Had to change our names, which we just used our middle names. Dyed our hair so we looked like some weird European immigrants. Pasty white because winter blonde hair, blue eyes. And my father spoke fluent German. We were not to talk to anyone. Had us learn write both in German and with our non-dominant hands. He made me wear glasses, and then found a crappy night shift job so he could work while we slept. This lasted about what feels like a month looking back. I was in early elementary school, so this was over 2 decades ago. but was probably closer to a couple of weeks. All I remember is one Wednesday, being tired of this whole lie, and I knew my mum didn't die in a house fire like he said, so I ripped the screen off the window to our second-story apartment and yeeted myself out the window. Tried to convince my younger siblings to go too, but that wasn't to be, which in retrospect would have killed them, so it was probably for the best. I ran across the parking lot and into another unit, knocked on the door, and a nice old couple listened to my story. They believed me, and they hid me from my father as he went out looking for me. Apparently he was in a panic and crying, so I know he did love us in his own selfish way. But he went to jail. Then he stole my identity when he got out. What a turd. Post-it frustrations. Walking to a friend's place from a bar. They were supposed to come and pick me up, but my ex showed up and I needed to leave. I did not drink, not that that is important. I would just go out with my girlfriend at the time to cut her off and sing karaoke. Her roommate had already taken her home about 10 minutes before I left. I just remember seeing a text saying she got back safe, and then a text from my ex asking why I left. Then I remember kicking a guy in the face, while a guy behind me picked me up. Then I remember some pretty traumatic stuff, but blocked most of it out, and was only half conscious for a lot of it. Then waking up in a motel tub, being scrubbed with bleach, what looked like a simple green and rough orange Premen's soap that you get at auto stores for oil. Note, bottle brushes do not feel great on the inside of you. One of them then kissed me, washed my mouth, and they left. I had to crawl out of the tub after rinsing over and over because it felt like I was burning. Ended up wanting to claw my own face off when I crawled past the full mirror. They took $300 out of my bag. I don't remember what I had it set aside for, but it was all the cash I had. I'm pretty sure they kept me a full day because it was only 5 AM when I got out the room, and that was after at least 2 hours of trying not to look like I needed to go to a hospital ASAP, getting my skin to calm down and trying to stop feeling for at least a couple of hours. Finally got to a place where I could take a bus to at least arrange for someone to take care of my daughter, since I probably looked like the worst mum ever, saying it was just for the night, but she was able to stay with her grandparents for a couple of days while I dealt with all this. The detective was extremely unhelpful, and assumed I just got drunk and went home with some guy. And of course, the only evidence was that the maid saw me leave, and the tub smelled like bleach. She, the detective, even laughed when I admitted I was leaving a bar, so I got no help. When I went to take the bus home, I ran into a friend. He asked what was wrong, and I just burst into tears. He offered to let me stay at his place for the night so I wasn't alone, and my parents had already agreed 2 more days, so I took the offer. I don't remember much of that night either, and never talked to that friend again. I do know that I punched him several times, but I'm not strong, and at the time I was only about 95 pounds, TLDR. It absolutely sucks, and left me extremely vulnerable for future trauma. Please unhelpful. Deleted. My own father kidnapped me. When I was 5, my parents were going through a divorce. He was an abuser, and an adulterer, and a smack addict to boot. One day, he picked me up as usual on a Saturday with my brother, locked us in his mum's house, shot heroin in his arms and refused to let us go because my mum just met a new bloke. Eventually, my granddad caught wind that we hadn't been returned home as usual and drove over. That's when all hell let loose. My drugged up dad launched on him, trying to strangle him and stamped on his chest. All the while, my mum had her fingers at my dad's eyes so he couldn't kill my granddad. They broke down the door and got us out. My dad had also told my brother to call my mum a whore. He had no idea what it meant. We got out of the house, chased the car by my dad with a kitchen knife. All got in safely and we were pulling off. My dad punched a window in over my face. That incident stayed with me for 20 years, and it's the reason I have anxiety disorder. Evil Eyes 3 says, I was almost kidnapped when I was 3 years old. My dad was out of town on a work trip, so it was just my mum taking care of me, 3. My older brother, 5, and my younger brother, 1. We got home from the grocery store and my mum was in the midst of carrying the groceries, putting my brother in his crib, and I thought I had gone inside to play with my older brother. I ended up staying in the front yard playing by myself, and my mother didn't notice, which is surprising because she's very overprotective and hyper-aware. A big white van pulled up, and a middle-aged driver asked if I could help him find his dog. He told me he knows I have a dog, meaning he likely watched me for a bit, and just wanted to find his and bring her home. He kept talking about his dog, and I was hesitant, but kept walking closer to his car asking, "What?" as I could barely hear him, and was worried about his poor missing dog. My older brother, who was only 5 at the time, happened to open the front door, looking at me at the same time I was just a few feet away from the car. He immediately knew something was wrong with the situation, and yelled my name. He asked me to come to him. He was terrified, but I didn't move, so he knew he had no choice but to come to me. He ran to me, picked me up, and as that happened, my mum peered out the front door, realising what has happened. She came running out, screaming. The guy obviously got scared and sped away. My brother definitely saved my life because if he didn't call my name, I likely would have walked close enough for the guy in the car to grab me. My mum got part of the license plate number, called the police, and I had to tell my story several times. I barely remember, but my mum told me that story. I still remember my mum holding me and crying, and I felt so bad for scaring her. The guy was never caught, but safe to say, I was terrified at being alone from that point on. We ended up moving shortly after, and I became very attached to my parents for the next few years. I would cry every single day they dropped me off at school, and I always wanted to be around adults, rather than other children. I eventually grew out of that, but it left me pretty traumatized for years. Sharon Witt. I was 14. There was a group of us playing a road rally game that had clues of various locations around the city where we could drive to, get the clue for the next spot, and then drive there. Everyone put a couple of dollars in a basket, which was the final secret spot of the race. In a parking lot, my friends dropped me off at the front of the store to pick up a clue at one of the cart corrals towards the back of the lot. It was about 10 p.m. in the summer, and the lot was busy. I was laughing and running towards the corral, seeing the clue box. At that moment, I also noticed a white panel van parked next to the corral. I'm at the box when 2 guys open the side door. One grabs my shoulder, and the other guy grabs my ankles, taking me off my feet. I start screaming, squirming, and inchworming erratically. I remember that the guy who had my shoulders was really sweaty, and he dropped me. Then the other guy let go. They hopped into the van, pulled forward through the parking space in the next aisle, and sped away. My friends in the car drive up to the corral aisle and pick me up. They hadn't seen the men or white van, but I was terrified. They asked me if I was okay, and I said yes after telling them what happened. We continued on with the road rally, but no one ever told an adult. From Elemental Star. On my 3rd birthday, my family, some friends and I went to Disneyland. We lived in Orange City back then and had season passes, so we went often. Keep in mind, a lot of these details are from what my mum has told me, although all details about the kidnappers came from me. My mum had made me my own custom Snow White dress for this occasion. It was my favourite movie, and the gown that she made me was more accurate than the costumes sold in the stores. Everyone loved it, including myself. And as I was an adorable little redhead toddler, a lot of people, friends, park workers, even a couple of strangers with small kids, would ask if they could take my picture. It was a slow day, and we were one of the largest groups, so lines were pretty short. Overall, it was a pretty good day. That is, until after lunch. My mum asked her friend if she could look after me while she finishes paying for the bill. She thinks nothing of it, since I'm quite an obedient kid, and agrees. At this point, a man and a woman come up and tell me that I have to go with them. I hadn't had much experience with strangers before, but was a naturally shy people pleaser. I figured they just wanted to take my picture, and had already asked my mum, like everyone else that day, so I went with them. It was not for pictures. The friend realises that I'm gone a few minutes later, and my mum flips out. When I was older, she told me it was the closest she had been to punching someone in the face. My mum is a kind and caring woman, but she is definitely a mama bear when it comes to her kids in general. My mum immediately notifies a worker, and the park goes into lockdown. People put on waders to start looking through the nearby waters. A radio call goes out to all workers, and even the front gates were closed so no one could go in or out. All of this took about 10 minutes tops. Disneyland does not mess around. Meanwhile, a retail worker is currently away from her radio and hasn't heard the call go out. You see, throughout the day she had taken notice of our family. Like I said, it was a slow day and I was in a one-of-a-kind Snow White dress. More than that, my siblings and I were often considered somewhat oddities because 3 of us are redheads. Even our mother is a redhead. In South California, 1 redhead is rare, but a family of them? People tend to take notice. Now this retail worker remembered me, but she does not recognise the 2 people that I'm with and makes a beeline for the front gate with me. She just says, "Wait a minute, you don't belong with them," and scoots me up. The couple hightails out of there. My Uncle Doug, my father's brother, is not a redhead, is out searching for me near the store. She sees him, recognises him from one of our parties, and hands me over, all without realising she's just twatted a kidnapping. So, random Disneyland retail worker, I thank you. You may not realise it, but you saved my life that day. Rest assured, I've done many dumb things since that day, but this still pretty much takes the cake as my biggest screw up to date. Well, thank you for watching this video, and I hope you enjoyed it. And as always, if you have a story of your own, please do leave it in the comments, and it may appear in a future video. I try to read and reply to all comments I'm able to. And remember, we can't always explain things, so sometimes it's better to not, and just have a good day. Goodbye for now.